Imagine walking through a forest where dragonflies have wings as wide as eagles, and millipedes stretch longer than a car. For millions of years, Earth was ruled not by dinosaurs, but by monstrous insects. So why did these terrifying giants vanish forever? Tonight, we descend into the lost world of the Carboniferous, to uncover the shocking truth behind the extinction of Earth's insect titans. Chapter 1. The Nightmare World of the Carboniferous. Try to picture yourself stepping into a forest unlike anything you know. The air feels heavy, almost wet, pressing down on your skin. Breathing is strange. You fill your lungs, and it feels richer, thicker, like oxygen is clinging to you with every inhale. This is not the air of the modern world. It is ancient air dense with oxygen, about 35% of the atmosphere, compared to the 21% we breathe today. It is the air of the Carboniferous period, a world that existed around 350 million years ago. At first glance, this Earth feels alien. There are no flowers, no grass, no familiar birds calling overhead. Instead, endless swampy forests stretch to the horizon. Giant ferns rise like walls. Club mosses, some more than 100 feet tall, form natural towers. Strange trees called lycopsids and horsetails dominate the canopy. These plants do not bloom. They reproduce with spores, filling the air with clouds of fine dust that catch in your throat. The ground beneath your feet is soft with peat, layers of decaying plants piling up in the wet soil. Over millions of years, this plant matter will compress into the coal beds we still burn today. The light is dim, filtered through thick clouds and towering vegetation. It feels claustrophobic, like standing in a greenhouse without an exit. Humidity drips from every leaf. Pools of stagnant water sit between roots, crawling with strange life forms. And then, the forest begins to move. Something flutters above your head, but it is not a bird. Birds do not exist yet. Instead, enormous dragonflies sweep across the sky. Their wings are as wide as a hawk's, almost 3 feet from tip to tip. The largest of these, called Meganura, is the apex predator of the air. It darts like lightning, eyes bulging with hundreds of lenses, locking onto prey with deadly accuracy. Imagine the sounder sharp, buzzing raw, like sheets of metal slicing through the wind. If one of these insects flew past you, the air would churn around your body. Closer to the ground, the nightmare continues. A shape shifts between the ferns, and then you see it. A millipede longer than your body, armored in thick plates, its hundreds of legs rippling in waves as it crawls forward. This was Arthropleura, a creature that could grow up to 8.5 feet long. Today's millipedes are small, harmless, barely worth noticing. But here, in the Carboniferous, they are giants, crawling through the swamp like armored tanks. If you stood in their path, they could knock you aside without effort. Their segmented bodies glisten in the damp light, each step echoing across the forest floor. The forest is alive with sounds, but none are comforting. The air buzzes with insects the size of modern birds. Beetles crunch through bark, their jaws powerful enough to cut wood with ease. Strange amphibians, the earliest of their kind, lurk in the swamps. They are not yet fully suited for life on land, but they creep onto the shore in search of food. Their slimy skin gleams in the half-light, their eyes unblinking as they watch the insect giants dominate the land around them. To us, this world would be terrifying. Every corner hides a creature larger than expected, stronger than imagined. The rules of survival here are simple. Size means power, and power belongs to insects. Humans, if we could somehow walk into this place, would feel like fragile intruders. Without modern weapons, without knowledge, we would not last long. Even a single dragonfly swooping down might mistake us for prey, its claws digging into flesh before we could react. What allowed this world to exist? The key lies in the air itself. Insects breathe differently than humans. They do not have lungs. Instead, their bodies are lined with tiny tubes called trachea, which deliver oxygen directly to their tissues. The richer the air, the more oxygen flows into their bodies. In the Carboniferous, with oxygen at 35%, their biology was supercharged. They could grow to enormous sizes, their muscles fueled by an atmosphere that made them stronger and faster than insects could ever be today. But the air also made the forest dangerous in another way. With so much oxygen, fires burned hotter, spreading quickly through the peat and ferns. Lightning strikes could set entire regions ablaze, flames racing through the dense jungle, consuming everything. Imagine the horror of trying to escape not only from the monsters of the swamp, but from walls of fire tearing across the horizon. Chapter 2. The science behind the giants. To understand why insects in the Carboniferous period grew so enormous, we need to look deeper than just their size. Their terrifying scale was not random. It was the direct result of Earth's unique conditions and atmosphere, loaded with oxygen. Endless swamps filled with food, and very little competition from other animals. In this strange mix, evolution pushed insects into forms that look almost impossible to us now. The most important factor was oxygen. Today, the air we breathe contains about 21% oxygen. It is enough for us, for birds, for mammals, and for the insects we see buzzing around in our daily lives. But during the Carboniferous, oxygen levels were at 35%, nearly half again as much as today. To us, it might not sound like much, but for insects, it was the difference between being the size of your palm and being the size of your arm or bigger. Insects do not have lungs like humans. Instead, they breathe through tiny openings in their bodies called These spiracles connect to a network of tubes, the trachea, that carry oxygen directly into their tissues. In modern air, this system limits how large an insect can grow. The bigger the body, the harder it is to get enough oxygen to fuel it. But in the Carboniferous, when oxygen was everywhere, this limitation broke. Their bodies could draw in more air, carry more fuel, and power muscles that were far larger than anything possible today. Oxygen supercharged their biology, allowing them to grow into monsters. Think about the Meganeura, the giant dragonfly that soared through the ancient skies. With a wingspan of nearly 3 feet, it was a predator capable of snatching frogs, small reptiles, or even other insects in mid-air. In today's world, dragonflies are small but fierce hunters. In that oxygen-rich past, they became apex predators of the skies. Imagine standing in the swamp and hearing the whir of their wings. One sweep of those enormous appendages could brush across your face. If they circled above you, their shadow would stretch across the forest floor. On the ground, the picture was even more unsettling. Arthroplura, the millipede that could grow longer than a human, thrived in the moist, oxygen-rich environment. Each segment of its armored body needed oxygen to move hundreds of legs in perfect waves. With the air of the Carboniferous, it had enough energy to power that movement, making it one of the largest land arthropods ever to live. Picture this. You are walking through a clearing, and across a fallen log, a centipede as wide as your body slithers, its legs scraping wood with a sound like dozens of knives. The forest floor was alive with creatures like this, and their size was only possible because the air itself fed them. But oxygen was not the only reason. The forests themselves gave these insects endless fuel. The Carboniferous swamps were filled with dense plant life. Trees rose tall, ferns spread wide, and club mosses blanketed the land. Dead plant matter piled up thick, creating soft layers of peat. This endless supply of vegetation fed smaller insects, which in turn fed the giants. It was a chain reaction. More plants meant more food meant more insects. And in this world of abundance, size became an advantage. Larger insects could dominate hunting grounds, claim resources, and reproduce with less threat from predators. Because here is the second part of the story. Vertebrates, the animals with backbones, were still weak. Amphibians had just begun to creep onto land, but they were fragile, small, and poorly adapted to dry environments. Early reptiles were still experiments of evolution, not yet powerful enough to rule the earth. Mammals were millions of years away, and birds did not exist at all. The throne was empty, and the insects climbed onto it. For millions of years, they ruled without challenge. This lack of competition gave them freedom to expand into niches that would later be filled by other creatures. Dragonflies became the lords of the sky. Millipedes and giant scorpions patrolled the ground. Spiders grew into forms that would terrify anyone who fears them today, spinning webs large enough to snare animals crawling through the ferns. Imagine walking into one of those webs and feeling strands as thick as your fingers clinging to your skin. Everywhere you looked, insects and arthropods were in control. Their bodies, powered by oxygen and fed by the jungle, became monstrous. And because vertebrates were too small to fight back, insects could continue to grow without fear. Size was no longer a dream. It was an inevitable outcome of the world they lived in. Yet this world was not just a place of survival. It was a place of horror. Imagine the soundscape, the hiss of wings slicing air, the rattle of armored legs moving over leaves, the scratching of mandibles cutting through bark. In modern forests, the loudest sounds come from birds or mammals. In the Carboniferous, the loudest sounds came from insects. The forest was alive with the music of clicking, buzzing, and crawling, a constant reminder that you were surrounded by creatures that saw you not as a threat, but as potential prey. One of the strangest details of this age is how it rewrites our idea of what giant really means. Today, an insect large enough to sit on your hand feels shocking. In the Carboniferous, an insect could cover your chest, brush against your face, or wrap legs around your body. The scale was so extreme that modern humans would feel out of place, like walking into a nightmare where every bug in your home had grown beyond your control. Chapter 3. The Turning Point. The Carboniferous world did not last forever. What seemed like a paradise for monsters was slowly unraveling. The swamps that had stretched for millions of years began to collapse. Climate change, long before humans ever existed, was reshaping the earth. The once endless humid forests, dried, flooded jungles turned into patchy landscapes. The blanket of oxygen that had powered insect giants began to thin. At first, the change was subtle. Temperatures shifted. Rainfall patterns broke apart. Swamps dried into scattered wetlands. Massive trees that once pumped oxygen into the sky started to vanish. With fewer forests, less oxygen was released. Over thousands of years, Earth's atmosphere transformed. Oxygen levels plummeted from nearly 35% down toward the 21% we breathe today. For giant insects, this was disaster. Their bodies had always depended on the oxygen-rich air to fuel their strange breathing system. Unlike us, insects don't have lungs. They breathe through tiny tubes called trachea, little air channels that deliver oxygen straight into their tissues. This works fine for small creatures, but when an insect grows too big, the tubes cannot deliver enough oxygen to reach the deepest parts of the body. That problem had been masked when oxygen was everywhere. But as the atmosphere thinned, it became fatal. The once mighty rulers of the swamps began to choke on the very air that had made them powerful. A dragonfly with wings wider than your arms could no longer keep its body alive. A millipede, as long as a man's height, found itself gasping, its heavy body failing under its own weight. The very atmosphere, the invisible gift that had once supercharged them, was turning into a slow suffocation. But oxygen was not the only enemy. As the swamps shrank, new predators appeared. Early reptiles and amphibians, once weak and overshadowed, began to grow stronger. These creatures had lungs. They had limbs built for movement across land. They could crawl into places where insects could not hide. A primitive reptile was small by our standards, but compared to an insect, it was a lethal hunter with sharp teeth and strong jaws. Picture this. In the shadow of a shrinking forest, a massive dragonfly rests, its body weakened by the thinning air. From the swamp edge, a small reptile lunges, snapping its jaws around the insect's delicate body. The hunter drags its twitching prize into the mud. For the first time, insects were not invincible giants, they were prey. And worse was yet to come. The skies, once the domain of dragonflies and other insect flyers, began to host new challengers. Over time, vertebrates learned to take to the air. First were primitive amphibians that leaped from branch to branch. Later, early reptiles evolved into flying hunters. Eventually, long after the Carboniferous ended, true birds would rise. But the beginning of this shift was already a death sentence for oversized insects. Imagine it. A world where a dragonfly the size of a hawk no longer soared alone. Instead, sharp-eyed vertebrate predators took to the skies, hunting them down. Insects had ruled the air, but the air was no longer theirs. The decline was slow but unstoppable. Year after year, the forests grew smaller, the atmosphere grew thinner, reptiles grew bolder, spreading across land, amphibians filled the swamps. The balance of power shifted. The most terrifying part is how silent it must have been. No sudden extinction, no great disaster from above, just a slow, suffocating fall. The giants that once ruled were pushed back into the shadows, shrinking smaller and smaller. The massive wings folded away into history. The endless legs of the armored millipedes stopped moving across the jungle floor. And so the terrifying truth emerged. The air that once gave them life began to suffocate them. It was the end of an era. The reign of the giant insects was over, and a new age of hunters was about to begin. Chapter 4. The death of the giants, the age of monsters, was ending. What once looked eternal, the vast jungles, the swollen air, the endless reign of insects, was collapsing. Slowly, quietly, the world turned against its ancient rulers. The forests that had fed them were disappearing. Those endless swampy jungles, thick with ferns and towering trees, began to shrink. Droughts replaced the rains. The lush wetlands dried into scattered patches. Where dragonflies once skimmed over endless pools, only cracked mud remained. Where millipedes as long as men once slithered through dark undergrowth, the undergrowth itself withered away. The great insects were losing their home. Without dense forests, they lost not just food, but safety. Their giant bodies, so impressive in the shadows of the Carboniferous world, became exposed. No longer could they hide under dripping leaves or stalk through endless ferns. Instead, they wandered into open ground, clumsy titans in a land that no longer welcomed them. At the same time, the very air betrayed them. The atmosphere that had once been thick with oxygen was thinning. From nearly 35%, oxygen dropped toward the 21% of our modern air. That difference might not sound terrifying to us, but to the giants, it was doom. Their strange breathing system, the trachea, the tiny tubes that delivered oxygen through their bodies, could no longer keep up. Each wing beat demanded more air than their bodies could pull in. Every movement became harder. For creatures built in the age of abundance, life was now suffocating. Picture the scene. A dragonfly the size of a hawk soars over a dying swamp. Its wings, once powerful, now drag in the heavy air. Each breathless moment brings weakness. Below, its prey scatters. The dragonfly dips lower and lower, struggling to stay aloft, and finally, it crashes into the mud. Once a king of the skies, now reduced to silence. And as the giants weakened, new killers rose. Early reptiles crept from the shadows. They had teeth built for slicing, claws for holding, lungs that worked even in thin air. Amphibians, too, grew stronger, lurking in the shrinking wetlands. Where once they were prey, now they were predators. They snapped at insects that had no strength left to fight. Imagine a giant centipede, armored in plates, slithering across a fallen log. Once unstoppable, it now crawls slowly, gasping, dragging its heavy body. From the darkness, a reptile leaps, its jaws close with a sickening crunch. The titan writhes, but the predator is relentless. For the first time in history, the insects were not the hunters, they were the hunted. And the skies, once the empire of dragonflies, no longer belonged to them. Slowly, vertebrate flyers began to appear. Primitive reptiles experimented with gliding. Later, true flying creatures would evolve. With sharper senses and faster reflexes, they dominated the air. The giant insects could not compete. The very skies turned hostile. The world that had birthed the giants was gone. The forests were silent. The oxygen too thin. The predators too many. One by one, the titans fell. Dragonflies tumbled from the skies. Millipedes collapsed in the mud. Scorpions the size of wolves shrank into smaller, weaker forms or disappeared forever. The rulers of the Carboniferous became victims of their own world's change. And then, the final horror, extinction without drama. There was no great asteroid, no single apocalyptic night. Instead, the giants simply faded. Each generation smaller than the one before, each forest emptier than the last. No thunder, no fire, only silence. Picture a once great swamp. Dead trees rise from black water. In the distance, the last giant dragonfly struggles across the horizon. Its wings beat unevenly. Its body is heavy. At last it falters, falls, sinks into the still water. The ripples spread, then fade. The sky above is empty. The death of the giants was not an explosion, it was an erasure, and yet their legacy remained, buried under layers of earth, under pressure of time, their bodies transformed. The same forests and creatures that once ruled now lie beneath our feet as coal. The very fuel that powers our modern machines was once the world of giant insects. Think about that. The kings of the Carboniferous, the monsters of the swamps, the lords of the skies, are gone. And yet, every time we burn coal, we are touching their remains. We are setting fire to an age of giants. The story of their end is chilling. They were reduced to shadows, their power drained by the air, their worlds stolen by predators, their bodies swallowed by mud. No screaming extinction, no fiery end, just quiet burial. And so the haunting truth is this: the kings of the Carboniferous were reduced to fossils, buried under the very coal beds that fuel our modern world. Their reign ended not with fire, but with silence. A silence that lasted hundreds of millions of years. Chapter 5. What if they returned? Close your eyes and imagine this. You wake up tomorrow, step outside your house, and take a deep breath. The air feels heavy, rich, strange. What you don't realize is that the oxygen in Earth's atmosphere has suddenly spiked, climbing back to the levels of the Carboniferous 300 million years ago. At first, it feels exhilarating. Every breath fills your lungs with energy. Jogging feels easier. Your body surges with life. But as days turn into weeks, something else begins to change. The world around you reacts. Plants grow taller, faster, greener. Forests thicken at a terrifying pace. Swamps spread. And in the shadows of this reborn jungle, old kings begin to stir again. Insects. You see them at first in small ways. Dragonflies that are just a little bigger than usual. Beetles that look unusually swollen. Cockroaches that seem stronger at first. You dismiss it. But in the background, evolution is working overtime. Oxygen-rich air is their fuel. And just like their ancestors, they begin to grow. Picture a dragonfly the size of a crow, wings shimmering in the sunlight, hovering outside your window. Imagine the buzz of a mosquito. Not the tiny whine you know, but a low, vibrating humbee, 'cause this mosquito is the size of your hand, and its shadow crosses your skin before it even lands. Creeping through the grass, centipedes stretch longer and thicker. Their armored bodies twist, each step deliberate, antennae swaying as they hunt. What was once a garden insect is now a predator that could wrap around your arm. In just a few years, your backyard becomes a new Carboniferous swamp. And you're no longer the apex of this world. Scientists have asked this very question. Could giant insects ever return if oxygen levels spiked again? Their answer is unsettling. In theory, yes. The breathing system of insects, their network of trachea works more efficiently in high oxygen. More oxygen means more energy, and more energy means bigger bodies. In fact, experiments in laboratories have already hinted at this possibility. When researchers raised dragonflies in oxygen-rich environments, they grew larger than their normal size. Cockroaches, too, swelled beyond their limits in thicker air. Nature has not forgotten how to make monsters. The blueprint is still there, etched into their DNA. All it would take is the right atmosphere. But here is the twist. Scientists also say our modern world might keep the giants in check. Birds dominate the skies now. Mammals, reptiles, amphibians, today's predators, are faster, smarter, more adaptive. Even if oxygen allowed insects to grow, they would not reign as they once did. They would be challenged at every turn. And yet, think about it carefully. When a dragonfly with a wingspan of 2 feet takes off, does a sparrow truly stand a chance? When a cockroach the size of a cat crawls into your basement, does any predator really follow it in? When centipedes as long as pythons prowl the underbrush, would you dare to walk outside barefoot? Modern ecosystems might resist, but resistance is not the same as victory. For every bird that falls, every mouse that vanishes, the balance tilts back toward the ancient giants. Slowly, perhaps, but relentlessly. Oxygen is their ally, their weapon, their breath. Now imagine the human experience. Cities would no longer feel safe. Streetlights would attract not tiny moths, but swarms of colossal wings, each beating like a helicopter. Garbage left outside would draw beetles and roaches as long as your arm, mandibles clicking, armored shells gleaming. Walking at night, you would hear them before you saw them, the heavy rustle of their wings, the scraping of their legs on concrete. Forests, reborn in the oxygen surge, would become hunting grounds. Step into the trees and you might encounter scorpions longer than your leg, their stingers raised and dripping venom. Sit near a pond and watch as dragonflies patrol the skies, their compound eyes locking onto you with alien precision. The world would not belong to us anymore. The terror is not only in their size, but in their numbers. Insects reproduce fast, evolve fast, adapt fast. It would take only a few decades for them to reclaim the niches of their ancestors. For every predator that tries to stop them, 1,000 more would emerge. We would be overwhelmed not by one monster, but by millions. And yet, this is not just fantasy. The proof lies beneath our feet. The coal we burn, the fossils we find, the whispers of the Carboniferous all remind us it has happened before. The air once gave birth to giants. The air could do so again. So the question is not if they could return. The question is, what would we do if they did? Could our technology, our weapons, our cities withstand the swarm? Or would we, like the amphibians and reptiles before us, become prey in the age of monsters? Listen closely, because the final thought is not comforting. It is a warning. We live in a world with thinner air. Oxygen sits at 21%. Enough for us, but not enough for them. It is this delicate balance that keeps the monsters small, that keeps the dragonflies light. The cockroach is manageable, the centipedes just inches long. Be thankful for it. Be thankful the air you breathe is thin, because if it were thicker, your backyard might already belong to monsters. Extinction saved us from living in a nightmare world. But what if Earth's atmosphere shifted again?